What do you think of artists who wait for other people to teach them how to be an artist?
I don't think you should wait for anything. I always had a strong sense that I had something to say, even as a little kid. I don't know if it was because I was like the youngest of four, but I was like, everybody listen to me. And so I started writing songs very young. So I was like, I can do this, you know, and I just like have always barged into situations where I'm like, I want to paint or I want to draw or I want to sing and made it happen. And so when it came to any and people are always like, well, what's the difference between doing music or doing film? Like, there is no difference to me creatively. It's just how I'm saying it. And it's never been about like, I need to learn something first. It's like, I'll learn as I go. And I think that has made it so I actually have output. Because if you wait around to know everything, you're never going to release anything. And like, only once you release something do you learn what you can do better next time.
And why don't you like to wait?
I don't know if it's just I'm an impatient person, you know, like I've just never depended on anybody to show me the right way to do something. Yeah, it's just I'm ready to barge in always, jump in feet first and then see what the consequences are.
You're a fast learner?
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
I think fast learners, they don't like to wait because they usually grasp things fairly
Oh,
quickly.
yeah. You only need to show me something once. And so like with camera, like I started as an AC just for friends of mine and like watched what they did, watch where they placed camera, watch what lenses they used. And that's how I learned how to shoot. Same thing with when I got into film through music. And so we worked with directors the first couple times we wanted to do music videos. And again, like, you know, I was in their in their notes, doing all their helping their pre-production, seeing where I could pull, you know, any help I could for them. And in that process, basically learned how to do pre-production on a production. And then I was like, well, I can't afford to hire a director every time, so I'm just going to start doing it. And I think that is also part of why I don't wait around, because I can't afford to like hire people. So it's like, well, if I can get like a $500 camera and I can go, now that I have this knowledge, I'll just go do it myself. So I think that's always been part of it too. Is like, what can I do myself to get this done?
You said in the past that you charge in where sometimes maybe you don't belong or you just like to just go for it. Can you give us examples?
Yeah, well, like with film, you know, coming from music, a lot of people are like, oh, you've got to go to film school, you got to learn all this stuff. And I just like never felt like that was for me. Like, I'm not going to go to school for 4 years before I decide if I'm going to go do something. So it's definitely like, let's just go make a feature. And when we made our first feature, a few of our friends that went to film school were like, you need to stop. Like, just, you're no good, just stop now. But we didn't listen to them. We were like, okay, well, we'll just do another one. It'll be better next time. So definitely I've gotten that kind of feedback. And as a woman in the industry, you always get that kind of feedback. Like, you know, I was AC on one thing once, and I was just filling in for a couple weeks, and I overheard the DP tell the camera operator, like, oh, we'll get you a guy next time, don't worry about it. And I was like, well, what is that about? You know, like, he was just so annoyed to have a woman on set with him, you know. So definitely, you know, I don't let that stuff really get to me, because I'll just go to the next set and it'll be different, hopefully. But yeah, definitely, you know, there's always cliques in every industry, in music and film, wherever. You got to break in, you know, or find your own people to make your own little circle around that you can have that kind of collaboration that's going to make something good.
Do you think in some ways it's good that you didn't go to film school because you weren't trained to do sort of like cookie cutter things? You found like a more interesting path?
Yeah, I think for me, like going back to being an artist, like it's like, you know, I like the weirder stuff. I like weird lighting. I like, you know, not straight 3-section narratives. You know, I like it to go to different places, and like, I like it to be surprising, you know, like I don't want to do the same movie we've seen 1,000 times, you know. And in some ways I think that makes our movies harder to like gain acceptance, because they are a little bit out there, or like the sense of humor is a little off or whatever. But I think in the long run, it'll show a body of work has like the same auteur type brain, you know, behind everything. And I'm not sure if that would have been beaten out of me if I'm like, oh, I must do it the proper way, you know, in this 3-act structure, like without, you know, not mixing humor with drama and stuff like that. Like, I definitely like, it's a lot of freedom to like not knowing the right way to do it. And of course you pick it up as you go along, because like there are standards for a reason, like in how to shoot, you know, you got your wide, your medium, your close, like that's there for a reason, you know, so make an edit make sense. So you have to pick up a certain base level, I think. But yeah, maybe it's better not sometimes, not to have, like, you must do it this way in these boxes.
Do you see everybody that you know that went to film school actually working in the film industry?
I'm not sure. Yeah, because I definitely know a lot of people that have gone. And what I have seen for some people that's been really good is more the connections that they've made, So like, they all went to this college, and so they all still work on each other's projects. They know who to call for different jobs because they all came up through the same program. And so I have definitely seen that work for people. But I think it's a struggle for anybody, film school or not, to get into the industry and gain the experience and be on the list to be hired. I think it's any which direction you come at it. It's not, it's not an easy industry.
Did someone actually say to you, don't keep making films?
Yeah, definitely. We were told to stay with the music, stay in our lane, stay what we know. And I got a letter from that friend like years later apologizing.
Oh, that's
so,
a nice friend.
It was nice because like, now I'm like fifth movie and I'm like, now you followed your path. You're good. And like another one was a person that was in film school and was like, no, it's all wrong.
One of those people.
Yeah. But definitely we went straight from music videos into a feature film. So we kind of skipped the like learning on short film thing that a lot of people do, And so like definitely we learned like you can't have a 10-page dialogue, like just monologue for your end scene, So like our first film has that. And it was definitely like very boring. Once we cut it, we're like, oh God, like now we know, keep our dialogue a little more snappy, And so like each movie we've tried to hone that a little bit more, keep it moving a lot faster. But like we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't done it, But it's out there. And that's the thing, like it was good enough to be distributed and get out there like 10 years ago. And so like it opens it up to the criticisms of a first time film.
And you've crowdfunded 3 times?
Yeah. Crowdfunding is like a journey. And so like for our early films, we had a good community. So my partner and I were in music in Boston, and we knew hundreds of people doing music in Boston. And when we transitioned to film, they were very generous. Like, yeah, go make a film. Here's $10. And so like we were able to crowdfund, I think it was like around 20,000 for our first 3 movies each, which was great. We were able to rent mansions and rent locations and pay our crew and our actors, which is the way you want to do it. I think I never wanted to like totally rely on a lot of favors, even though I have also. But yeah, crowdfunding is definitely difficult. It's time consuming, but it does build a good community around you. And it makes people very invested in the project and where it goes. They want to see it through. So, and you don't have that kind of organic community around a film necessarily without that couple hundred people's input,
And you finished the projects, right?
Yeah, finished all of them.
That's important too.
Got the rewards out.
Right. Yeah, see?
It's a lot, yeah.
Where does the urge to be an artist come from?
I think it just goes back to like some narcissistic idea that I have something to say that's a little bit different than everybody else. And just the urge to create, like, I was saying earlier, like I need to be moving. I need to have my hands in something. I need to be thinking about something. And I think during the pandemic, not to dwell on the pandemic, but where I wasn't working, it was very depressing, and I just like, I got a dog because I was like, I can't deal with this, like not having anything to do. And, and I think that like kind of put into perspective, because the minute I started working again and started working on my own projects again, I was happy again. So I think it is partially that, like I need to be creating something just for my own mental state to keep me going as a person.
What do you think about artists who are more talented than you, but they don't want to put in the same amount of work because they're waiting for their work to be discovered?
Right. Well, what is the saying? It's 99% perspiration creating anything. I think 99% of it is physical labor to me. It's like getting on set, knowing all the technical stuff, doing the job, going into the edit room for months and months and months. It is definitely like a slog, and it's work, and it's like very hard. So if you don't have that work ethic in addition to your genius and your talent, like I don't think you're going to get very far unless you have money to pay everybody to do all that other stuff for you. So I think if you have the talent and not the drive, you need some cash.
I like that. That's good. That's a good little saying. But there are people out there who are very talented, and then you see that they're just kind of like they don't want to take certain steps. They don't want to try to make contacts. I get not wanting to promote yourself, especially in this day and age where everybody wants to be a quote unquote influencer. It kind of gets a negative rap. But have you seen that in people that whether they went to film school or not, they seem like they're not willing to put their stuff out there, but they're brilliant.
Yeah, and why that is. Yeah, I know like certain friends of mine who are very talented directors and things. They're just like waiting for that perfect storm of like, I have a good script, I have the money, I have producers on board, all like this hurricane of things coming together for them. And I just feel like if you're waiting for it to be perfect, it's never gonna happen, So like for me, like we always have a ton of ideas ready to go. Like we have our $10,000 scripts, we have our $1 million scripts. And it's like, if we can just figure out what resources we have in that moment, that's the project we do. And, but like I have like scripts set in space I'll probably never be able to make. But if that was my dream project, then I would not make anything, So it's like I have these other ideas. I'm like, okay, well, it's in a house with 2 people. Like that one I can make next week, if I just like have the actors on board, and have a location on board. So I think it's really about just diversifying where you are at, as far as like what you need to get done. Because yeah, if you're waiting for that perfect storm, it might not ever come for you.
Do you think it's also about being a realist?
Oh yeah, I'm very pragmatic. Yeah, and especially with like perfection. Like I am definitely a perfectionist at heart, but I'm a perfectionist that like knows that getting to 90% is like maybe okay, and because that last 10% is going to take you like way longer and way more work to get that last 10% perfect than it got you to the 90%. So if you can accept 90%, you're good. Just release it.
How many art classes have you taken as an adult, whether it's music, filmmaking?
I've taken no art classes since high school, unfortunately. Maybe I should. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh man, should I go take some art classes? None. I took like guitar lessons from like a local guy for $5 a lesson in high school. I was in AV club in high school, so I shot like all the football games, all the plays, all that stuff on VHS. I did ceramics back then. I did painting back then. But yeah, no, as an adult, I've just been like, I'm going to do this. I think like in the 90s when all the Riot Girl stuff was going on, I just had it in my head, if I could just make it to a city, I'll get in a band and I'll make it. Like, and that will be like, my lottery ticket, out of like rural America. And I think that was kind of like the dream that was fed to us, like in the 90s, like in magazines and everything, like, you're just in a band, you'll do great. So I have that in my head. Like if I just get to a city, it's all fine. And so that's exactly what I did. I like moved from rural New York to Boston and I was like, I'm in a city now. It's going to be great. And I didn't quite realize like nobody cares about anything that's happening in Boston. Like I wish I knew like earlier I needed to go to New York or LA. Not that it might have made any difference at all, because now I have this great body of work I was able to do there. But yeah, I just dove in. I started going to open mics. I met my partner doing music. We started a lot of bands. We did bands for 10 years. We toured the country. We released a lot of records. So yeah, that was kind of like going back to what we were saying before, like I just dive in. Doesn't matter that I don't know how to play bass or I don't know how to play drums. I'm like, I'll learn it on the spot. That's always what I've done. Like I have a sense of what it's supposed to be like and like, well, just make it happen.
Did they have pay to play back then? Because I know that was part of the Sunset Strip and that was a criticism.
Yeah, it wasn't so bad in Boston. Like a little bit. There was like some, these bands with or bills with like 20 bands on them. And like you had to sell X number of tickets to like play the gig. But yeah, mostly I was able to stay away from that stuff. And like certainly with like college radio and stuff, there was like a lot of payola at that time, like, from like record companies. But I was never really associated with a record company that was gonna like put up some money to like get my song to number one, But I always feel like I was in the wrong decade, like because I was doing very like angry girl music. And like by the time I was doing that, it was more like the indie rock guy kind of music. So like I feel like, had I been a little older in like the early 90s or the 70s, it might have, worked a little bit better. I always feel that a little bit with film too. Like I kind of miss like the moment where like people were making money on indie films, like either like the mid 90s or the early 2000s. If you were able to make a film like on 16 mil or something, I feel like it got out, But maybe the moment's still to come.
Sure. Well, so this was though after the hairband revolution. So then grunge had started. Is that
For
right?
where I think I would land, yeah, like the early 90s. I think I would have
Sure.
been so good.
Because I mean, there was that shift here in LA where, you would see these guys and girls promoting their bands on, with their flyers and stuff up and down the Sunset Strip, and it was insane. And then once Nirvana and Alice in Chains, it just totally changed the whole, taste of music.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
but do you feel like if, because there were some angry, it wasn't like weird, like Susie and the Banshees kind of cool, British
Yeah.
stuff, but it was still, there was,
Yeah, like if I could have been like in L7 in LA in the 90s, I would have been a happy camper.
Sure. How many instruments can you play?
I play kind of badly, like guitar, bass, and drums. So like the standard rock trio, I can do all that, yeah.
And how did you teach yourself?
So guitar, when I was younger, I did take lessons, but not too seriously. I was mostly like, I need to know 5 chords so I can write my song, and I was really into Bob Dylan, as like a young kid, in addition to like grunge and Courtney Love and all that stuff. But I loved like folk music. I think from my parents were like old hippies, so it was just like around, and so his voice is terrible. Like, I love it. But like, I was like, I don't need to sing that great. Like, whatever, the words are what matters, And so it's always like, how can I get enough of a chord structure and a melody just to get my words out? So that's why I started on guitar. It was just the easiest. And then later, once I was doing bands and stuff, it was really hard to keep a drummer. And I think that's true for every rock band. Like, the drummers just come and go. And I was getting so frustrated. And I had a friend over, and I was like, he lent me a drum kit, and I put it in my basement, and he gave me like a couple lessons, and then I was off. So my old band, Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, I played drums, my partner played bass, and that was it. I didn't need anybody else. We played for a long time like that, just the two of us. Right, White Stripes, yeah, I guess people were always comparing us to, even though we didn't really sound like that. But again, it was just like taking that power back, because I'm like, I can't depend on some dude who's on drugs to like come and play this gig for me, So I'd had so many bad experiences. I fired a guy on stage once because he was so messed up, he couldn't play. And I was like, I'll just play the show myself, like, go.
Yeah.
So like after having enough of those, I was like, the drums were holding me back, so that's what I'm gonna learn. And I like very much into punk rock, so it's like, I only need to know so much, It was like, I was fine. I was a straight ahead drummer, but it was nothing fancy. Like, I didn't need to do a ton of fills. It was like enough that I could just sing on top of. And then with my friends and stuff, they needed a bass player. I'm like, I can do that. Because like, I had enough guitar and I had enough knowing now rhythm from drums. So I was like, bass is the nice little middle ground. Bridge those two instruments. So I played bass with some friends for a while, which I do. I like bass a lot more than guitar. It's just like, it sounds better to me. I just like the tones better. But yeah.
Is there a comparable drummer on set to the film person on set?
As who's gonna mess you up the most? Maybe sound, right? Like, who's gonna not show up and it really messes you up? Like, you can't continue.
Okay. Yeah, someone told me that they were at a Who concert and Keith Moon passed out, and they had to like scan the audience for a drummer that knew the song, and someone did.
I'm sure
they knew.
that, yeah.
They brought him up. But I mean, I didn't know that about bands. I don't know that much about music culture that I would know that drummers weren't always reliable.
I don't know why. They're very unreliable. But it was always like in Boston, if there was a good drummer, they were in 20 bands already. So then you're scheduling around the drummer, because like, he's like, well, I've got practice with this guy Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It was like a nightmare to keep one on board. So I was like, no, I'm just going to go do it. And like, that's been my ethos, because I think because I come from kind of like a punk rock mentality, like DIY was so big. It like impressioned on me as a child, like, just do it yourself, that I never thought like I couldn't. I was like, give me a month and I'll be good enough.
Sure. How did you learn cinematography?
Same. So I did some AV club in high school. That's not cinematography though. That's just like with the camera on the play, So I had an interest, and I had an interest in photography. I'm a terrible photographer still to this day. I'm actually like trying to get back into it, because it's just like a little different. And people always hand me a camera and they're like, take a photo. I'm like, no, if you're not moving, I can't do it. But it was just kind of born out of necessity. So, you know, we were in bands, we wanted to make music videos. We did a couple with directors that ended up being very expensive, you know, like paying for their crews, and even if the directors did it for free, just the whole production was expensive. And we're like, we can't afford to do like a, you know, music video for like every song on our record if we don't do it ourselves. So we bought like a crappy little Panasonic like Zoom camera, and we shot a ton of music videos on that. And so that was kind of the introduction. And then our first 2 features, we had a director of photography who came from photography, and she was just incredible at lighting, incredible at just answering our questions, you know. And so she was picking up some of the cinematography stuff like on the spot too, you know, like as far as like, you know, just eye lines and framing, because like that stuff doesn't matter when you're just taking photos, you know, because they're still. And so just like through those processes of like actually just being on set and seeing that. And then as, you know, as I kept making things, I started to AC. So that was pretty much my film school. Like I am watching everybody all the time. Like, why does this DP like this lens? I had a DP who always wanted to start on a 35 millimeter, just like at the top of the day, throw that on the camera and we'll go from there, you know? And it's like, and just seeing like how that affected his style, you know? And like, I think, you know, a lot of people don't understand like the distance, you know, like when people want to give me their storyboards and like, I want to shoot this on the 50. I'm like, okay, but you're this far away. It's going to be like their nose, you know, like, you know, and like, but just getting that knowledge is from being on set and seeing why people are making the lens choices they are based on how far away they are and how much they want in the shot and how much they want in focus in that shot. I picked all it up just from watching. So, you know, as a second AC, as a focus puller, yeah, it was mostly through that. And like a lot of that, I started doing that in Boston on some features, but there's not a ton of indie work in Boston. Sometimes the big Hollywood movies come through, but you're not going to get hired onto those as like a local, which is probably correct because I don't think any of us had like the experience that they would expect after coming to LA and working on film sets. I'm like, oh, okay, I learned a ton more. But yeah, I just dove in. Same thing. You know, the first set I got into in LA, I just found it on a Facebook group. They were shooting on Blackmagic cameras. I had one. I was like, I'll come out. We shot in a cabin in Big Bear. And it was like, that was my first experience. And then, you know, I got hired by the other cam ops on that movie on to the next gig. So it just like after meeting, you know, 5 people, you start getting hired everywhere. And that was really just how I got started. And, you know, and I've gotten just better. Every movie, I'm like a little bit better.
With learning cinematography, what aspects have you struggled with the most?
Oh, man. I think with cinematography, like, it's always like what, again, going back to being a perfectionist, like what would be the perfect shot? And on indie sets, I'm always in tight spaces and I can't get the shot that I would love to. So, you know, I'm shooting much wider than I want to. The lighting's not as good as I'd like it to be. So for me, that's always a struggle. I'm like, okay, I'm in like a 2-foot bathroom or I'm in a hallway that's like tiny. So that's where I struggled like the most as far as what's in my head versus like what I can actually do. Whereas like if you're on a set that's built and you can move the wall, you can get whatever you want, you know? So I think on the indie level, that's the hardest thing is just like locations. Hardest to learn. Yeah, I don't know. It's all hard. Like the technical aspects of it. I know every time I'm going to work with a new camera, I go read the manual the night before. But like all that little technical stuff, like I pick that stuff up easily. So like I'll learn the camera very quickly. I'll know all the menus. I'll know all that stuff. And then it just, once you get the basics down, it's just the aesthetic choices, you know, like I want it to be very shallow focus. I want not much in the image, or the opposite. I want a lot in the image. I want a vista. I want it to be super in focus. And so it's like making those artistic choices and then knowing how to get those things in camera. You know, it takes like a little time to understand the relationship between your ISO and your aperture and your focal distance, and then how far away you can get. All of that like is like a little dance that happens, and that just comes with experience to understand like, I want to do this, and like without just having to swap my lens 40 times to see which one is the exact thing that I want. Like now you start to get a sense of what is going to work.
Do you usually get more than one chance to do like a shot or two, or sometimes it's just, this is the only shot we're going to get?
On indie sets, yeah, it moves very, very fast. You know, so like we're doing 10 and up pages every day. So it's like, you got 10 minutes to set this up, get your wide, get your close-ups. And like, usually I care a little bit more than anybody else, So I'm like, oh, please, can we just do it again? Because the eye line is off, or whatever. So I put my foot down as much as I can. But at the end of the day, we got to make our day. And if everybody else wants to move on, we got to move on, And so a lot of like what I'm good at is just moving fast, with a level of quality I try to strive for, and like my dream is to like have 20 days to shoot something, have 30 days. Like I would like be so happy.
What was AV Club like?
It was good, like we would just be assigned like, all right, you're doing this basketball game, follow the ball. Our morning announcements were over the televisions in every classroom. So there I was like clicking record on the kids doing like their little news presentation for the morning. But yeah, we would make little commercials for little local businesses. And like, I watched some of them recently and they're terrible, but they're funny. And and everybody seems a lot younger than we felt at the time. I was like, wow, these babies are like walking around without supervision. But yeah, so it's like at the time, we were editing VCR to VCR, and like, that's like where my like film knowledge stopped until the DSLR revolution, basically. It was like, and then learning how to edit on a computer. But like, I never did any film stuff, like actual film strip. I never have edited any of it, never shot it. It's a dream someday to shoot on 16 or 35. I have plans in my brain for it, but so I just kind of skipped from like VCR click and go to like Premiere and DSLRs.
But were you the only girl in the class?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I think I was, yeah. Yeah, I definitely have been used to that all my life, being the only girl around. And it's disappointing, in music, in film, everywhere, like a lot of rooms I'm in, I'm often the only woman there. And I don't think that's good or right. And I hope it's changing. I haven't seen a huge shift. And I know people, with Me Too and everything, people talk big, like we're going to get to parity, but I think there needs to be some sort of money attached to it. Like, you get X tax break if you have parity on your set. There needs to be like some consequence for productions that they're not hiring women, because the only way we're going to get women in is if you hire them. And I think women have more expenses, especially as adults, that they have to worry about than a lot of single white men that are around ready to do the job. Like women have kids, they've got it. They're the main caregivers for their parents. Like there's like other expenses because of how our society works, and that there is no childcare and there is no elder care. Like that you have to pay them. You have to pay them to show up, and like they're ready to work. It's just like there needs to be money attached. And I think that's the biggest barrier, because nobody's going to like go out on their own money to be like, oh, I'm going to like pay extra to hire a woman, whatever. There just needs to be like some structural reason that they're forced to do it, and then it'll come naturally.
Right. Well, I'm going to play the devil's advocate for a second, but I get the sense that you're tough and you don't need to be babied. No, and that's good.
Yeah.
I think that's that. And I think sometimes that's the bad rap that women get, is that maybe just I'm not talking about Me Too, but just everybody's a little sensitive, but you seem like you can thrive in many situations. And so I think that's an advantage.
Right. Well, I think especially historically, like if you meet women who were in the industry in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like they are tough as nails, like nothing. You could say anything to them, they don't care,
And they'll
like,
give it back to you. Yeah.
No, like I'm here to work, I'm professional,
Sure.
Whatever. And like, I think, you develop a thick skin, because I've heard everything, but I'm there to like do a good job, and I'm there to like work, and I'm there to have fun as much as I'm allowed to in like these situations, and like everything else has to roll off. And like, but I do keep like the mental Rolodex. Like, I'm not going to work with that guy again because he said this, and it's like, so I'm not going to like support it. But also, if you want to keep your job, like if you're the one complaining, you're the one that goes, it's never the person that said the thing or did the thing, in my experience.
That is true.
And that's like, you're the problem. The minute you speak up, you're the problem. And so it's unfortunate, because that means nothing changes. It's still the boys' club.
What makes you an artist?
I think to be an artist is to create. You have to finish something. You have to, because you can toil away, but I feel like until it's out in the world, is it art? I don't know. It's a tree falling in the forest. But yeah, I think it's the creation for me. You know, to have created it and put it out. That's the art. You're an artist now.
What do you think makes someone an artist? Is that a different thing for you? Do you think, I mean, a lot of people say they're artists or they're writers, and there's like this debate. Well, if you're not getting paid for it, are you really an artist? Are you really a writer?
Oh yeah. No, I don't think you need to be paid for it. I mean, throughout history, I think, you know, people had to have patrons. The king had to commission your portrait, and that's the only way you're going to eat. And so you do a certain type of art to make sure that you can eat, and then you do your own art in the back burner. You know, I do my own movies and I work for others, and sometimes I'm more invested in the project than not. You know, like I shoot interviews like this for people for corporate stuff. I want it to be good. I want it to look nice, but it's not like my art. That's a job, you know? And so I always make sure I have my artistic things that are coming from my brain more also always going, you know, even though I enjoy being an AC where I don't have any control over what is the image, you know? Might get my little, once in a while, you know, you can say, well, a tiny thing, you know, maybe they take it, maybe they don't, but, you know, but I think it goes back to being in bands. Like I like being the bass player sometimes. I like being the lead singer, you know, and it's like figuring out where you fit into those spots on whatever project you're on is really important, and making sure you don't step out of the lane too far when you are in a more supportive role. But yeah, I don't think you need to be paid for your art to be considered an artist. I think when I meet people and I'm like, that person's an artist, is because I think they're a genius, or I think they think a little differently than everybody else. And that's like where it's coming out. You know, it's like, if you surprise me with something, if your humor's like a little bit off, or, you know, is there something new to what you're doing, I'm like, that person's an artist.
Did anybody try to rein you in, especially in high school?
No. I had very supportive parents. I was the youngest of four, and by a lot. So I was mostly home with my parents all the time. You know, like everybody else was at college. And they, you know, there wasn't a lot of money. So it wasn't like you can go take all these classes or you can go to this museum or whatever. But like, you know, they gave me their guitar from the 60s, and they gave me whatever art supplies I wanted. And I just sat in my room and did whatever I wanted. And they always were like just very, there was no pressure to go to college. There was, I mean, I think because maybe my sister was the first generation in our family on either side, I think, to go to college, you know? So it wasn't like, it was something there was nothing you had to do. It was go live your life, enjoy it, have fun. My dad's very proud that I got into music, because I think that's something he wanted to do. And, you know, and they're like very proud that like I travel the world and I get to create and I do all, you know, I'm doing what I want. So I think for them, it was just about happy. If you're happy, or you're good, you know? And so they were like verbally very supportive. There wasn't like a lot of monetary, like go off to this, you know, academy or college and learn whatever you want. That wasn't there, but like the do whatever you want, live your dream, go try to make it happen. That was 100% there.
When you got to Boston, did you see other people that had come from situations like yours, or maybe they were a little more cookie cutter and they were rebelling against what families wanted?
Boston's a funny town because I learned a lot about it once I got there. You know, like obviously I knew Harvard was there, you know, but like there are so many colleges there. And because I showed up at the age where I should have been going to college, I think everybody just assumed that I was, you know, and so you're with suddenly, and especially I hung around Harvard Square because that's where the folk club was that I like to play at, Club Passim. I got a job at a record store right around the corner. So I was in Harvard Square all the time, and people just started to assume I went to Harvard because I was just always there, you know? But no, and so you meet people, and especially like, I think people that from money don't want to ever tell you that they're from money. You know, they want to seem like they're on your level of poverty, and they are not, you know, and you learn that later, you know, that they had more opportunity all along than you did or whatever, you know, but in that playground, you're the same for a minute, you know? So yeah, so I think in Boston especially, it's a very rich white city that like, you know, people had like more supportive stuff. But there's also a huge underground art community of people like me, you know, that came from nothing and just want to make weird stuff. And like, it's very like experimental people doing cool stuff.
Where does the inspiration for your art come from?
Oh boy. That's a hard question. I'm not sure. You know, I just get ideas, and go down paths. The paths tend to reveal themselves, as you start working on something. Like often with our films, like we have a script or whatever, and then once we get into production, like it kind of takes a different route. But yeah, like I like things that are surreal. I like things out of the norm. So maybe it's more like dreamlike or more fantastical, but not fantasy. I don't like wizards and stuff. Like that's fine. That's not what I mean by fantastical. Just stuff that's like more dreamlike, I guess, is where the plane that I'm trying to pull from. I love very colorful cinematography. So I love like 1970s movies from everywhere, but especially like Italian Giallo. Like they were not playing by any rules, any 3-act structure. None of that mattered. It was like, were the lights cool? Was it dreamy? And maybe, I don't know if some of it is like me viewing it 50 years later, and this is just what the 60s and 70s looked like in Italy, but now and on film stock and everything, it just seems so dreamy. So I just like stuff that's not reality. I don't care for reality or drama, like drama in the movie genre term at all. Like I don't want to see two people having a relationship fight unless there's like a monster or something, to make it, because it's not interesting to me. And I think it's because it goes back to me very, very grounded, pragmatic person. Like I just don't want to I don't need to watch drama like play out. Like there's enough of that in real life. I don't need to see real life on screen. I think sometimes like when you're shooting, people are like, oh, that's not realistic. This light shouldn't be there. And I'm like, but it's a movie. It doesn't, if it looks good and it works for the story, like put the light there, let it be orange, let it be blue, like whatever, like, we're creating the world. And for me, that's the biggest thing is create the mythology, create the world, and then play in that.
So growing up, you weren't into The Notebook or that wasn't your favorite movie? No?
No, we had like mom and pop video store in town, and they would do like $5, $5, 5 days. And so like I would just be in the B movie section, like any Roger Corman movie. I like realized like, okay, this is gonna be weird. I'll watch that. Action, sci-fi, anything that was, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was watching the weirder sci-fi stuff. B movies, the stuff. Like, yeah, I was into like all that. And not so much like, I think it's like Titanic was really big when I was a kid. I did see it, but like, did I care? Not really.
Do you think art comes from pain?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, they won't create unless they're depressed, and I think certainly with like my songwriting, when I started out, it was like, these are my complaints, or these are the things I'm depressed about, or I'm really sad. So I'm going to write a song about that. And as I got older and I got like, maybe more balanced in my life and in my brain, my chemicals, in my mind, that became less interesting to me, and so, the songs became more abstract or just about conversations or whatever. But I think for a lot of people, they can't create without that pain, and I think that's always in the background. I think to be a sensitive person and to need to express that and need to deal with our emotions and deal with like how we're responding to things. I definitely think that always will come out in art.
But does an artist that's great necessarily have to have a tragic life?
No, I don't think so. I think our brains do a lot of weird stuff, and I don't think they need to necessarily have like PTSD or some tragedy to pull from. I think being alive is hard. I think getting through a day is difficult, and like that could be plenty to pull from and do something very creative and that touches other people.
Has anyone ever come to you for advice on getting started, being an artist, being a musician, a filmmaker?
I think I get that question a lot as like a woman, like how do you start as a woman in XYZ? And usually, it's the same advice. It's like, just go do it, go start something, find your people, find your friends that also may have a camera or may have whatever to bring into your creative soup. I think that's the only, because I'm such a hands-on person, that's my only advice. Just go start, and it's getting easier and easier. Like, I won't ever shoot on an iPhone, knock on wood, but it's there for people that are beginning. Like, yeah, get your iPhone, go do it. Figure out your angles, figure out what you think makes a good cinematic image. It's definitely getting easier to just go and do it with LED and iPhones and stuff. But I think it's like a don't be afraid from like from the art side, the technical side, whatever, you'll learn it if you have an aptitude for it, if you want to, or you'll find somebody that knows it to help you. But from the art side, I think it's just don't be afraid. I know a lot of people, we all deal with like imposter syndrome. I have a lot of friends that are like, oh, but I don't want to release anything because what if people say it's bad? And I'm like, what if they do? Is their opinion the thing that's going to stop you? Like, do your art and release it, and move on. I never want to be like languishing on the same project. Like I want to do it, let it get it out and move on. Like I'm ready to go on to the next thing. By the time the other thing is done, my mind is like, what else is new? Like I always want to be working on the new thing. Which is like we were talking about promotion, like it makes promotion hard because like by the time it's done, like I want to do something else. I don't want to talk about this movie. I just wanted to get out. But yeah, like for art, I think it's the creation and it's the release. You have to release it so you can move on. So you have to finish it.
And so when you tell people or give advice, whether it's a male or female, that they it's almost like they can't really care what people think. I guess is that kind of what it boils down to?
Well, I think also too people are often looking for like, well, what's the magic for success? Because it's obviously not hard work. What is your secret? What's your secret like ingredient? And it's like, no, the answer is hard work. So if you don't want to do the hard work, you're not going to finish anything. And you can give people all the advice in the world. If they're not going to work at it, it's not going to happen.
Sure. That's really cool. So when you were working at this record store and everyone thought you were going to school there, but you were really working at, that's its own movie right there.
Yeah.
That's a really cool, and then
I think at one point somebody from Harvard interviewed me for the magazine, and that even made, and like I didn't say I went that, it's just like because I was playing at the folk club, they were like interviewing like people they thought were interesting, and like I think the fact that I ended up in that magazine like made it even more like, oh, she's Harvard, whatever. Even though it didn't say that in the article, it was just like in the Harvard magazine. Like for a while that was online. It's like, this is like another tangent of mine, but the early internet is disappearing, and I hate that so much from an archival sense. Like our whole lives of like MySpace, any articles written about me in the early 2000s that were on like Boston.com or whatever, they're gone. Like maybe there's archives somewhere, but I don't even think so. Like that first 20 years of the internet, it's like you're never going to be able to find it again. It's really disappointing. But for a while, that was something that would come up when you Googled me. It was this article,
Right.
But yeah, it was very high fidelity in there. Like we were so cool, or we thought we were. Like the three of us that worked in that record store, one was the older guy, dyed his hair black. He was in the bands. He was awesome. My best friend at the time, also working at the record store. So it was a fun couple of years. I was there like almost 3 years.
But the thing is, you weren't a student there, so you had this other perspective that would actually make a great story. If you ever, I don't know, maybe people think their own story is boring, but I think it'd be cool. I don't know, Sophia. I don't know, it'd just be neat, and then just because the thing is, you had this different perspective. I don't know, I can't say what you thought, but it just sounds interesting. But so because it seems like you're not afraid to try things. Mm-hmm. When people ask you, well, not just how do I get started, but how do I, whether it's crowdfunding or whatever it is, how do you tell them to kind of like get over expectations from what happens or how people perceive it?
Well, I think a lot of my thick skin came from music initially because I'm used to getting the reviews there, and I got every kind of review because I was doing like angry music. I was screaming. It wasn't particularly melodic. It was loud. It was fast. It was angry, and that's the kind of music that if you like it, you love it. And if you don't like it, you're like, ugh, and so, I got tons of bad reviews. And it's like, I dealt with all that at like 18, and like I was getting these reviews. And so like, I had to get over it fast, to keep working. And so now when people criticize whatever I'm doing, I'm like, I'm the first to criticize my movie. I don't think anything I've done is to my level of what I want to be doing. I want it to be more perfect every time. And so like, if you tell me something is wrong with my movie, I already know. Like when I read the reviews, they're like, yeah, I agree. I don't think it stops the movie. I think it's still fine. I think it's still watchable. I think it's still fun. But yeah, I agree. 99% of the time, I'm not wrong. So I think it's like letting any of those criticisms that come either from critics or your friends or whatever, like you can't let that stop you. You can either like assess it, see if there's something to learn from it, or disagree. Like, I think disagreeing is fine. I think focus groups aren't necessarily your friend, you know? Like, when you bring your movie to people, like, what do you think? Because, like, they're not going to necessarily have all the same background information that you brought into it and why you made those choices as you do. And so, you know, they're coming up with their own things, and, like, they should do their own movie, you know? So, yeah, it's really just, like, a thick skin. Like, you can say anything to me at this point. I've heard it, you know, and I don't care. I'm going to keep moving.
What does work ethic mean to you?
I mean, work ethic is everything, right? I mean, you're not going to finish anything unless you have that drive. So I guess it's the drive to do the thing. And, you know, like, came from a very blue collar background. Like, my dad is like he's a stonemason, but it's physical labor, you know, and growing up seeing that, like, you know, I didn't necessarily want to go into physical labor myself, but I feel like going into camera department is pretty much doing physical labor. But, like, seeing his work ethic of just, like, physically moving your body to go create a wall or a fireplace, you know, like, growing up seeing that and seeing a finished product, you know, I think that, like, definitely instilled in me. You got to work hard, you know, physically, mentally, all of it goes into the creation. And you got to bring it through the finish line. And that finish line in films could be years from now. You know, you start a film. I mostly like to finish our films within a year. That's my goal for our features. I think this one that we started before the pandemic kind of dragged on because there's a lot of dead time in between. It drove me crazy. I almost gave up on it, but I've never given up on a feature yet. You know? And it's finally out now, which is at festivals now, which is good. But yeah, it's just, you know, you need to have the drive to finish. And whether, you know, it doesn't mean you have to be fast. You know, I think some people take a long time. You know, I don't like to, because my brain wants to be 100 miles ahead of where I am. But yeah, it's the drive to finish the thing.
What's the difference between having a strong work ethic and being a workaholic?
I'm not a workaholic, which is maybe not what you expected. I love having a lot of downtime, you know, especially if, like, I do a movie and it was a rough 3-week shoot or 2-week shoot or whatever. I want, like, a month off, you know, like, that's best for me. My brain needs to melt. It needs to turn off. It needs to absorb new ideas, new movies, new inspirations. So yeah, but I like to work very, very hard in sprints. So, like, I will work so hard for a month, you know, on your project or on this project or whatever, and then I need a break. So I think my work balance is maybe not, like, evened out, because it's, like, sloth mode and then it's, like, crazy hyperactive mode, you know. But yeah, like, I think my partner is more of a workaholic. Like, he will work through, like, being tired, and I'll do that on set, but, like, at home, he'll be on his computer at all hours, and he's always been that way, you know? And I'll be like, we need to sit, you know? And I think getting a dog and stuff, like, helps us, because, like, we'll leave the house now to go for a walk. So yes, I think he's the workaholic and I'm the sprinter. But we both have a very strong drive, and we're both very creative, and we want to do the work. And I think that complements each other well. Because, like, when I'm ready to give up on something because I've already sprinted, you know, he's, like, tugging it along day by day, doing the little pieces. And then I come back, I'm like, all right, we'll finish this up, you know?
How did you develop your work ethic?
I think because I started in music, it's so small. You write a song and it's done. You did a thing. You know, it's like, and then you just do 12 more, you got a record, you know? So it's, like, more chunked out little pieces. And then to, like, make that into, like, a feature length movie, like, it's chunking out the pieces, I guess, to finish it. You know, you get through pre-production, you get through, like, finding locations, all the little pieces that comes into the whole. But as far as, like, getting it done, I think it's just, like, breaking it down, because you can't look at the whole picture. Like, you can't be like, oh, I'm going to make a record and it's going to be done. You got to start with the first song, you know, and same thing with, like, a movie. You got to start with, like, the idea and the script, and then who you're going to cast. You know, there's so many little pieces along the way to conquer. I think that's the only way to do it. You can't look at the whole picture.
What was the first song that you ever heard that made you want to be a musician?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a good question. Like I was saying earlier, I love Bob Dylan. Like, maybe Tangled Up in Blue is, like, my favorite Bob Dylan song. It's, like, it's a journey. You know, I feel like you're going through decades of his life with this woman. Yeah, maybe that. I'll stick
good
with
song.
that. Yeah.
You didn't want to be Joni Mitchell?
I love Diamonds and Rust, but yeah, I never got into her much further than that. Yeah.
Bob Dylan. Yeah, no.
It's funny, you know, people ask me about that with like movies, and for a long time, as far as female representation on screen, like I love James Bond, you know, and like for a long time it was good enough for me to identify with James Bond. I never identified with the women, I didn't care. You know, I was James Bond. And I realize now in having nieces and things, like it's better for them to see a woman in that role. Like go see Atomic Blonde and see the woman do that, you know? And now that that's changing, I'm like, yeah, it was a coping mechanism. Because like if I wanted to be the hero of the story, I had to identify with the male, you know, and now there's more options, and I think that's great. It's learning like how I coped versus like what it should be.
Do you ever feel like the options are too gratuitous, that maybe we're forcing it, or you're happy that there's representation?
I mean, is any representation good representation? Is that what you're saying? I think it depends on the context, right? I mean, I don't mind like nudity or gratuity if it makes sense in the story and if it feels like it's female forward. But if it's obvious, like a hand of a dude wanted to write this and make this, and like, yeah, it's always, it comes through as inauthentic in the project, I think. But I think it's getting better, you know. I do, as far as representation on screen, it's slowly getting better.
Sure. I know that's a hot topic right now.
Yeah.
And so people feel like either they're happy to see that, which is great, I think, in some points, but then other times, is it forcing? Are we just putting this in there and, you know?
Oh, like the Ghostbusters, like, oh, it has to be women now. I think men need to, like, there's been 60 years of male protagonists. Like, I think we can have like a little bit of an overreaction for a while, you know, sure, where maybe men are like a little bit in the minority of who's showing up on screen. I think that's okay, you know. It'll even out eventually. But yeah, we've had 60 years. Let's kick up some dust.
How many hours should an artist work a day?
I think that's a tough question because, like I was saying, I'm a sprinter. So, like, I'll work 18 hours a day if I've got a goal in mind, you know, or I'll work 0 the next day, you know. I think it is good to chip away at things every day, but I don't think, like, this mentality of, like, you need to work 8 hours or 10 hours or 5 hours at this thing. For me, it doesn't work for me. You know, I can't be that structured. You know, I'll do 2 hours this day, I'll do 10 the next day. But I could see that maybe for another personality, you know, more structure is better. But I think because I'm a little bit of a procrastinator sometimes, like I just want to plow through the finish line. And when I'm in the mood to do that, I'll do it, you know, but it might take me a week to get there sometimes, you know, whereas like I could have been working at it a little bit along the way. But yeah, I don't think there's a set time for me at least, you know, but I do know for other people it does work better. I'm going to work 4 hours every night in my garage at the stop motion. You know, I have a friend that does that. He comes home from his corporate job, he works on a stop motion at night and then spends time with his family, and that works for him. But I don't, like, maybe because I'm freelance, I don't have that kind of day-to-day structure. I've got no structure.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if having structure actually helps art in some sense, because you just have a short window of time to do it before you have to be at the door or go to bed or whatever. And I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah, deadlines certainly help me. Like if I know, like I want to submit to this festival, so like movies gotta be done by this date, I need that motivation sometimes, you know? So it's like, even if it's an artificial deadline that you've set for yourself and you're like, you know, you're gonna hold yourself accountable in some way, I definitely think that will help, because otherwise it'll just languish, you know, you're just gonna keep working on it forever. You need to have an end point for everything. And that goes back to, you know, is it 90% done? Is it good enough? And you're at your end point, you're done.
When you first moved to Los Angeles, what was your strategy for finding work in the film industry?
The first job I found was on Facebook. I think Facebook, I don't know if it's getting less so, but I think it's really great, the groups, for just getting your foot in the door, you know, just responding. And I was lucky. That like I just had the right gear at the right moment, and they just needed somebody that day to show up for 2 weeks, and took a leap of faith and went to this house. I was like, I'm driving into a place I've never been. I'm gonna stay in this cabin with these people and hopefully I don't get murdered, you know? And luckily it all worked out. And once you meet a couple people, usually if you do good work and you have a good ethic and you're fun to be around and people can tolerate you for 16 hours a day, you'll get hired again, you know? But it is a lot of like personality, you know, you can't be too needy or demanding or annoying because like you're not going to get the work. So yeah, so it's just like getting the first job out of the way and then just responding. A lot of my work actually comes from film festivals. So, you know, I bring my work to a film festival and then I meet other screenwriters and other directors and suddenly like I'm on their mind to call because they've seen my work and they've met me. We've gotten to be friendly. We make friends on Facebook or social media and then they're like, okay, maybe you can come shoot my movie when it's time. So like a lot just through general networking, you know, and luckily like because I think it would have been much harder for me if I didn't have any body of work when I first arrived in LA. But because I had 3 features under my belt that I'd made on nothing with nobody in Boston, you know, just like our friends, you know, it showed that I had something, you know, like to come with and be like, all right, look at this is what I can do, you know, hire me for whatever. So I think that helped because had I tried to make those movies, not knowing how LA works, I think it would have been a lot more difficult. You know, now I probably could, now that I've met enough people and made enough connections and I kind of understand a little bit more how the industry works here. I've been able to make low budget movies here, but I think just like diving in, it would have been much harder not having that understanding. So yeah, so I guess it's a lot of networking and talking to people and getting out there, responding to ads.
How does the industry work here versus, let's say, Boston, which is a major city?
Yeah. Well, Boston has like the big movies that come from LA and shoot there, and then just people doing it very DIY. So there's not like a lot in the middle of like the $1 million indie type stuff, you know, or even 500,000. You know, there's not a lot of those movies being made there that I know of. So for me, it was just like, who's my community? I was friends with burlesque dancers, poets, musicians. That's who I cast in my films, and they're great, you know. You know, people that were used to putting their whole heart and soul out on the stage, like, you know, suddenly like, yeah, I want to be in your movie, you know, or I want to help with your crafty or whatever, you know. So it was just like, I had that community there and it was very easy to get started, just like pulling in these people. And then here, I just think it's a little more structured, I guess. Like, you know, you need this permit or like you need this insurance and like, you have to have like a certain base level, I think, of professionalism that I maybe didn't start with, even though we did have like insurance for our first stuff. You know, there's like a base expectation, I guess, of how it's going to run. And I know there are people that do it without that base expectation, but you know, it gets a little sketchy. And especially now as a worker, like I don't want to be on sets where there's not like a base level of professionalism because you get abused very quickly in whatever way, you know, time, food, money, you know, all that stuff. So you want to see like a base level of like, okay, did they have insurance? Do they have a payroll? Whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like not having the community yet. It was more it. And now I have it a little bit more. Like I know a lot of crew I can call. You know, we all work pretty cheap for each other, you know, and our corporate rates are much different than our friend rates. And, you know, so like you build up your friends. It's the same thing. It's just like it's a little bit more structured, I guess.
And this Facebook group, was this like a Mandy type thing? Or no, this was different. This was like a Facebook group that was about filmmaking.
Yeah, it has like a very generic, I don't even remember the exact group. It had a very generic name, like Film Crew Needed Los Angeles or something like that, you know. I'm sure I'm still in the group if it still exists. But yeah, it was definitely like a very generic name. And there's like a whole bunch you can join. You know, I'm in one I don't do reality television. I'm not opposed to it, but I'm in like a women in reality television group where people are very helpful with each other and with resources and ideas and things. So there are like a lot of different little groups where people are trying to find each other. Yeah, I think it's better. Like I did try Mandy and some of them were websites, but I think like for whatever reason, Facebook, you can just click on the name, see kind of what they're about, you know, before you respond.
How about Craigslist? Because you can find some decent stuff there, right?
Do you still?
I don't know if you still, but I know that you could either find horrible things or like really like, wow, this person's actually really cool and they're legit. It's not, you know, but knowing is the tough part, I think.
Yeah.
Being able to vouch for the person.
Back in the early 2000s, my first Craigslist ad for a bandmate was like, PJ needs the bad seeds. That was my ad. And one person responded and he was amazing. And so like, that was my one like good experience with Craigslist for a drummer. It was like this one ad I put out into the, you know, the inner space of whatever, the interwebs. But I've never gone to it for crew. since then for like film crew. I feel like I'd be a little scared about who would show up.
Do you remember your first paid filmmaking job here in LA?
Yeah. I think I was making like $50 a day. It was out in the woods. We were all staying in this cabin. But yeah, I definitely wasn't paid minimum wage. I think I got was like $500 for like the 2 weeks. And it was like, all right, well, I'll just go on the adventure. Definitely, like if there's an adventure involved, like for me, sometimes that's more than like whatever money is involved. I'm like, all right, this sounds crazy. I might die. Let's go. But yeah, and that led into the next feature I did out here was in, oh my God, what's Roswell, New Mexico? It was like another thing like, okay, you're going to get in this car with these people and they're going to take you to another state, you know? And so like definitely there's things that could have turned into bad experiences, I guess, you know, like leaps of faith. But, you know, they were fine. I wouldn't say I was treated that great on some of them or that I was paid what I should have been on any of them. But, you know, it's all learning experiences.
So knowing that like, okay, these are the terms and this is also for the experience. It's not just like, because you know, as people are younger, they're like, I need to be paid. And that makes sense. People should be paid, but kind of like earning your stripes.
Yeah.
But being paid at the same time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess, you know, they always say that like you need to work for free or whatever. I don't think you should ever work for free. I think that's bad. And so like I always try to pay at least minimum wage for even the lowest jobs, you know, like I think like that's the law in California and it's also the right thing to do. You know, it's a very expensive state to live in and I believe that our minimum wage should be higher, you know. But in my own life, yeah, I'll work for whatever if I think it's fun, you know. That's just how I've structured my life. But you know, just to get your foot in the door, at least smaller productions, they don't have a lot of money. It's very expensive. Like, you know, crew is the bulk of your cost always. So yeah, if you want to have that experience and you want to take those gigs, I think that's okay. And you'll learn a lot about what not to do, usually.
Do you think that you were comfortable going on the quote unquote adventure because you toured with bands?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. You know, you get a certain sense of self and a certain sense of being able to work with people and collaborate and get through anything. Like, I think one of the greatest things about film for me is like, if I don't like somebody in 2 weeks, I don't ever have to work with them again, you know? And if I do like them, like I remember them and I try to like be friends and come on each other's projects, you know? And so it's like you're collecting the good trading cards and you're like dropping the ones that are not as good. But yeah, you know, I can get through 2 weeks with anybody pretty much, you know, probably because of music.
Were you into were there some situations where it was like dicey where you didn't know if you had a place to stay or whatever with different band setups or, you know, whether you're going to get paid or whether, you know, bar owner or whatever was going to, you know, stiff you on the money or?
Oh yeah, certainly, you know, like money disappears in clubs. Like, you know, certainly played gigs where like they pass the hat around and then it disappears, you know, like where did it go? But yeah, you know, there's always some sketchiness. Like, I think anything where it's considered fun for you, then suddenly, you know, it doesn't matter to people if you get paid or not, you know. So yeah, you got to watch yourself a little bit. But, you know, I always had other side hustles. So it's like if one gig falls through, like I'm not going to be out on the street that gig, you know. But if every gig falls through, it's going to be a problem. Yeah. But yeah, certainly, you know, like I like... If I trust whoever's bringing me on and they don't have a lot of information, I'll go with the flow, you know, but if it's a stranger at this point, like, yeah, I need to know where I'm staying, you know, give me the address, let me look it up, you know, show me a contract, all that stuff. But I have a friend who hires me all the time. I get a location and a time. I don't get a call sheet, whatever. I'm like, okay, but we're friends. So like, I know at least like you're going to look out for me, you know, even if the production's not, we've got each other, you know.
How are you able to find so much work here now?
Most of my work comes from networking at this point, just from knowing people. I probably should put myself out there to blind ads a little bit more. It's just not my personality so much. But yeah, it's through referral at this point and through people I meet, you know, just... I have so much work out there. I shoot a lot of short films and films for other people that then go off on the festival circuit. So my name is always like kind of circulating a little bit. But yeah, so it's just mostly through friends at this point.
Do you ever worry, does it ever occur to you, like, what if the work's not there next month? Or you just kind of trust that it's going to show up?
It feels very seasonal, honestly, because like there's always the beginning of the year, I always have like nothing. January, February, like I'm like, am I ever gonna work again? You know, and especially when I first came out to LA, like when I first hit those, I was like, oh no, like it's over. Nobody has any work. Like I gotta figure out how to put myself out there more. But my summers always get insane. From like May to September, I work a lot. And I don't know why that is, especially on the indie level. Like I think on like the more union level, when you're doing pilots, there's always pilot season. It has more of its own season. I don't know why on the indie level summers are always really busy for me, but that's been the case every year that I like kind of make it up in that middle chunk of the year, and then it dies down around November again. But yeah, so it's just like kind of trusting the seasonal aspects of it a little bit, even though I don't understand why they happen, other than like holidays and stuff. But yeah, something always comes around eventually.
Yeah, LA does seem to kind of close down right around. I mean, I know Halloween isn't part of the holidays, but it almost seems like into the holiday season, if you want to call it October 31st or whatever, it seems like LA shuts down a little bit in some sense.
I love how spooky it gets in LA in December when everybody leaves, because so much of us are transplants here. So like everybody goes home and it's so quiet. Like Hollywood Boulevard, you could go shoot whatever you want. There's nobody there. I love that time. Like, so I almost never go home for the holidays because I just like how quiet it is here.
How much do you have to prioritize getting paid to work on other people's projects versus doing your own?
I think it just comes down to scheduling for me. You know, like I'll schedule my own projects if I know ahead of time I'm going to be working on somebody else's thing. I'll just schedule my own stuff for later, you know. So a lot of freelance is just keeping your schedule in its reins, and stuff changes constantly. It drives me crazy. But yeah, I don't think it's like I need to totally choose ever. I try to make time for everything. But you know, like my work, like for a feature or whatever, if I have 2 weeks to shoot or whatever over X period of months, like I can find those days that are always working around whatever other work I have, because I'm the one planning those, so I can decide when they are. So I don't think it's a choice so much, but yeah, there always needs to be some work coming in.
Was that part of your plan to always have some time for your own projects for the two of you? Yeah, I mean, I know that they say like, hey, if you get a job in reality TV, you might make great money, but then it may be harder to get your own stuff made because you're so bound to these schedules.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely somebody was asking me recently if I wanted to go into reality. I'm like, I don't know that I want to work every day for 6 months, you know, like, because I need my downtime. And physically, like, you know, I'm not the youngest anymore. Like, there's definitely a reason why, you know, a lot of backbreaking work happens in your 20s. You know, I'm getting a little bit older and I don't want to be that, like, damaging to my back and stuff, like, you know, carrying a camera every day for months and months and months. Like I can do it for 2 weeks, fine. You do it for a month, fine. But like when there's no end in sight and no break in sight, I don't know if that's for me. That's why I like features where it's like you got a month, you got 2 months, you take a break, you know? So yeah, I think it is always important for me to have my own thing going because I need to have control over something in my life. So I need to be the one, like, you know, if something's not right, it's my fault and that's fine. And I can accept that. But at least like I am the person trying the hardest, you know? And then like, you know, you can go off and work on whatever, but you know, I always need something that's mine, that's cooking, you know, brewing.
Yeah, because some people make that decision early in life, or then sometimes maybe if after they have a successful corporate career, you know what, I need time to do creative stuff, and that's the most important thing over making money. And I get it, when you have kids, you can't make that decision, but yeah, I wasn't sure if maybe being available to have projects or being able to do whatever you want was more of a decision maker in what jobs you take.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, like for me, it's all about you know, like that's why I like being a director of photography because it is creative, you know, and I do have a lot of say in the project as a whole. But other jobs and stuff, that's just filling in my schedule. And I do it because I've learned the skills. You know, these are the skills I have now, so I might as well let them make me a little bit money on the side, you know. But yeah, it's always about my own stuff. That's like what's the goal is, I guess, you know, is to be doing my stuff on a bigger and bigger level, my own projects. And everything else is feeding into that machine for me career-wise, you know? But yeah, that's certainly the most important thing always is the art in what I'm doing. But I have a lot of fun. You know, like I like being in AC, like I said, like and I have a lot of fun doing it. If the set's good and the people are fun, you know, and you're doing good work, that's good enough for me for that period of time. You know, I can put the other stuff aside for a month or 2 months or whatever. But yeah, there always needs to be something that I'm working on in the back burner.
Can you talk about developing ideas for your films?
Yeah, so I work with my partner, Michael J. Epstein. We, you know, because we live together, we consume all the same media, and often we just, you know, and we talk constantly about ideas and things. And so we often come at the same ideas at the same time. I don't know why. We're one brain, you know, and so like we'll start talking about ideas, what we want to do next, what kind of ideas we have. And then usually he goes off and we'll write an outline or a treatment or a script for it. And then I come back around and I'm like, okay, I like this, I don't like that. Let's fix this. Let's punch this up. And that's kind of our process of going back and forth then through the edits. But yeah, usually like it's not like he writes totally in isolation. We've talked about things mostly before he ever sits down. You know, we'll talk about where the story is going, or I'll come at him. He's always annoyed with me because like I come up with scenes. I'm like, this is the movie, and it's like one scene, and it's like it's so important to me, this one scene. He's like, it's not a movie yet, you know. And so it's like you know we're workshopping how that fits into a bigger thing, and like how we get to that point where I get to have my moment. But yeah, so he's more. You know, he comes from an academic background. So he's a writer anyway. He does research, he's written papers, all that stuff. He's a professor. So I think like that comes much more naturally to him, like actual like sit down and like write the outline, write the script, get it on paper. You know, because if that was left up to me, like without a deadline, without anything, it would not be good and it wouldn't be fast, you know? So it's just like his strong suit. We each have our strong suits and that's his. But I always have a lot of input along the way as he's writing, after the first draft's done.
But then you also have your own very clear set of what you do with cinematography and producing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do a lot of the pre-production, finding locations. We work on casting together usually. But you know, that first look through, like swiping, it's like the Tinder swipe on the casting websites. Like, you know, you get a lot of information from like the choice of photo somebody has, or like how they, you know, say their name and their reel. Like often once I hear their voice, I'm like, no, it's wrong. You know, just weeding through all that stuff. There's so much to do with pre-production, and we both do it, but like a lot of it will come to me. A lot of that planning level of stuff. Yeah.
Do you make changes to the script during that first read?
Usually, like I will just give my opinions on things, or just say like what I don't think is working. Mostly, like if I'm going to actually physically make changes, it'll be to the dialogue. Like I'll come in and be like, no, this wouldn't say this or whatever. But mostly, I'll let him take care of that. Yeah.
How many times will you read a screenplay before you give Michael feedback?
Once. I hate reading screenplays, which is like horrible for a DP to say. Especially like if people aren't sure they're hiring me yet, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read it once I'm hired. I need to be paid. But yeah, like I hate rereading stuff until there's been major changes. Yeah. So yeah, I'll read it once through. You know, if I need to like reread a passage, or, you know, ask a question if something doesn't make sense to me, like, yeah, like I'll backtrack and read it again. But yeah, it would be a first read through before he gets all my opinions. I'm not quiet about it.
What's your process for making a screenplay better?
You know, I think it's changing with time. Like I was saying before about how like our first movie has like an 8-minute monologue at the end, like to camera. And it's like, you know, you realize that doesn't work, you know? So the things that didn't work on the previous movie, I'm like, want to make sure I don't fall into those pitfalls again on the, you know, on the next one. But for me, it's a lot of like character and dialogue, like trying to make sure that I think this woman would say that, or I think this makes sense for the character. So those little punch-ups is what I'm more interested in than just like structurally, you know, what is happening. It's the moments of the conversations for me.
Well, you mentioned earlier in the interview that you're a fast learner. So it sounds like when either something doesn't work for the two of you, or if you go to a festival screening and you're noticing like, okay, the audience is reacting weirdly, then it sounds like you adjust it very quickly for the next.
Yeah, for sure. Or even for that same movie. And we did a vampire movie called Blood of the Tribbids, and it's kind of like a very patriarchal movie where like the women and men are separated. We showed how the men get their blood to survive, and we just like didn't think it was that important, like to show how the women did it. And then when we had our first screening, that was the number one question. It was the mythology, and I was like, oh, you guys really care about the mythology here. So we went back and like actually filmed another scene. So before we released it, it had like a little scene in it. And it's not a great scene, but it answers the question, So yeah, you can still, at least on the indie level, it's nice. You can still react, but different audiences will react to different things. You'll get a laugh in one audience that you won't get at another one, and so it's good. Like that's what is really good about festivals for me is hearing different audiences. Because if you get one laugher in the audience, suddenly it's a comedy and everybody's laughing. And I'm never offended by that, even if it's not necessarily a comedy, because Below the Tribbles isn't really, but it has comedic moments. So if people want to laugh at that, great. Like, have fun with it. It's a campy movie. But this most recent movie we did it has like a lot more straight ahead humor. It's a mockumentary. And so there were a lot of things in there I didn't know if it would land. Like there's some jokes about like Vietnam and how it affected movies for 20 years, and I'm like, is this gonna land? Like, do people remember Vietnam? And like, is it gonna land? And we were in another country, and it did. Like, people thought it was really funny. So, but now I'll see on the next audience, maybe people will be offended or not get it or not understand like that there is that kind of history of Vietnam movies. So yeah, it's a learning experience, and I think like at our level, I can make changes right up till I hit deliver on whatever distribution platform we're going to.
What kind of questions do you ask when trying to make the screenplay better? Are you asking them to yourself? Are you asking them to Michael?
I think to both of us. It's trying to figure out like, does the story make sense? And then do the characters make sense? Is it to our taste? Does it have enough of our personality in it? That kind of stuff. Like, is it something we actually want to do? Like we've written screenplays and we're like, it feels wrong or whatever, I don't love like movies about female competition so much. And Michael had like a screenplay that was about two actors vying for the same role. And I was like, I don't know how to make this movie as a feminist totally. I think it's in there somewhere and we just kind of hit a brick wall on it, and that's fine. You move on to the next idea, and like that might be a thing to come back around to later when I have like a little more clarity on it. So yeah, and I think it's okay to abandon at the script stage, not once you've shot. I hate abandoning a project once crew and actors have been involved. But at the script stage, that's your moment to have total freedom to quit on something, I think. But yeah, it's the little things and making sure it's something that excites us. I think that's the biggest thing is like, can we have full enthusiasm to do this for a year or two and then go out and talk about it and promote it as our brand?
So that would happen, the two of you, or Michael would write the first draft, he'd show it to you, and you finally decide together, I don't think we want to invest time in this. That's happened before?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, usually it happens because of lack of resources. Like, you look at it and are like, all right, this is just going to cost way too much money, and we don't have it, but we'll hold on to it. It's a finished script. It's never a bad thing to have extra scripts around in case somebody with money comes knocking someday, like, what else you got? I'm like, well, I got 20 of these, But generally we don't like have something really polished if we're not gonna like go into production on it. But yeah, I think it's more an enthusiasm thing than anything as far as which thing we're gonna go to and what can we afford to make without too much trouble. Because we are fully independent still, fortunately, unfortunately.
Was there any way to make the two actors vying for the same role less catfighty? I mean, was there a way to make it more empowering or no? It's just
I think it's in there. I think, and it's certainly not the intention of the script to be it, but like I'm thinking about it because I think a lot of women in the industry especially is like, there can be one. We talked about that before. I'm like often the only one in the room. And like once they've got one, they already fulfilled their little quota and they're good. They have diversity. So I think there is like an inherent competition amongst women because like we're not used to like allowing the space for another one because it's never been allowed from the outside for us. So I think like I maybe overthought the script a little too much because I'm like, how can we comment on this and have it be empowering at the same time? And I think it's in there somewhere. I just, I don't want to make it and have that get lost and accidentally make something misogynistic. Because I think I have seen movies like that where it's like, what are you saying in the end? I want any thematic message like that to be very clear what my position is.
Well, I mean, there's already been tons of shows and series. I'm trying to think of the one with Reese Witherspoon and Laura Dern, and it's great. It's beautifully shot, and Shailene Woodley, forgive me, I'm blanking on the name of it. I watched it, and it was great scenarios, but it's like I've already seen this a million times, and
Sunset Boulevard is already perfect.
Yeah. So it's hard when you're seeing the same story, and it's the same in the corporate world, I'm sure too. Just but yeah, so something. Just wasn't sure if you could make one of them an alien or something. Somehow make it
Add
interesting.
A monster. That's always the answer. One of them is a monster. I
think we have a quote from you here.
Oh, God. What did past me think?
It says here, I love leaving a movie and having something to think about. I feel a responsibility, especially as an indie filmmaker, to have something to say.
Yeah. All right.
I like that.
Smart.
Excellent.
No, certainly, like, I love movies with themes. Theme is most important to me above plot, character, any of that. Because that is the thing that will stick with you. Like, what was this movie about? How did it make me feel? Did it make me think about, like, philosophically the world? I like my brain likes puzzles, and it likes to eke that stuff out. Like, what was the intent and what are they saying? So I think, I always try to have something, in the fun. I think genre, horror, sci-fi, all that is the perfect playground for inserting themes or thoughts about how the world functions, or whatever you want to talk about, because it's candy coated by, like, the fun stuff. But like, to me, if it's just like a slasher and there's no backstory or something like that you're trying to say with it to change it from what it is, which is like almost nothing other than just killing women, it's not that interesting to me. If it's just a series of kills, that's not something I'm gonna, like, think about fondly later.
How do you know the difference between loving film versus loving filmmaking?
Ooh. I think I fall in and out of loving filmmaking, and I never fall out of love with film. Because filmmaking is so hard. It's a commitment to a time period, and it's just hard work. And so we always kind of, I've never given birth, but you always give it, like, you forget the labor when you have the finished product, and then you immediately want to do another movie because you've forgotten how hard that movie was. I think that's very true with filmmaking. Whereas, like, film, like, when I find a good film, I love it, and, like, the best films for me are the ones where I can stop thinking about how did they shoot this? What location is this? Whatever ideas about the actual production. If I can, like, just immerse myself in it and just go on the dream with it, that's my favorite thing.
Why did you choose filmmaking over music?
I don't know that it was a cognizant choice. Like, I'm done with music. I'm going to do film now only. I just think, like, there are more opportunities in film somehow, which is a weird thing to say. I tried, like, I gave all my 20s to music. I tried really hard, and I just kind of hit the ceiling for opportunities, I feel like, as far as I was going to go. But I still love doing music, and I want to get back into it. But since moving to LA, I've just been, like, tunnel vision ahead doing filmmaking. And just, like, the songs, they haven't been coming, as frequently. And it's probably because I'm not doing it as much, so I might get back into it. We'll see. I've got another record in me for sure. But yeah, I don't think it was, like, a choice, like, I'm done with this, because I love music too. It's never going to go away. That's my first love. But yeah, film just called to me. I don't know.
Was there a day that you remember where, like, a number of things had happened and you're just like, I'm out of music for a little bit? Or, was there, like, a turning point, like a specific incident?
No, because I think if I were still in Boston, I'd probably still be in a couple bands. So there's definitely, because I think there was a slow realization at some point that I wasn't going to be some big rock star, Whereas, like, that was always the dream from when I was, like, 8 years old. I'm like, it's, I'll get to a city, I'll be a rock star, I'll be whatever, number one. And at some point, you figure out, like, all right, that's, for whatever reason of privilege and knowing the right people and all the business side of things that you slowly learn. Like maybe you learned a little too slow, like how the business actually works, there was like a slow realization, like, okay, I've taken this as far as I probably can take it. And it's pretty much like at a professional hobbyist level, like I play gigs, I get paid for them. I can do a tour once in a while, it kind of pays for itself, but I'm not making career level money out of it. And that's fine. I'm proud of the music and I'm proud of the bands, but you realize like how much are you going to keep putting into that circle that doesn't seem to be growing. And part of it, I think, was being in Boston too. It's like a small city. And it like, you always think like, oh, we're so close to New York, like it'll work out, but it never does. Like you can't even go to New York enough to make that work, business wise, networking wise. But for whatever reason, like film at that time in the 2000s when like DSLRs exploded, suddenly it seemed like you could be making film everywhere. And I think that's still true to an extent. You can make your film in whatever city and you can go to the same festivals as the LA filmmakers go to if your film is good enough. And so I think it felt a little bit like location didn't matter as much, though now I do believe being in LA does help me a lot as far as taking my work to the next level. And especially as working on other people's projects, much easier to do that from LA, even if I'm traveling. So I think there was a time when it was like, I got to go to LA. But to start, it just felt like I could do that from anywhere and still grow a career. Because like, if something isn't growing, then I'm like, well, what else can I do? So I think like with music, it was like, it wasn't hard enough. I like, what else is harder that I could start over at, So maybe in my 40s, I'm like, I'm going to do this now, but I don't know what the next thing is, ceramics, who knows, But 20s is music, 30s is film. We'll see as long as it feels like I'm moving ahead creatively, artistically, and business-wise, I'm going to keep doing it.
What's the most important part of the filmmaking process?
Oh man, for me, I like just getting into the collaboration aspects of it. Getting people in a room. This is like my only social time is making films. Because otherwise I'm very much of a hermit. Like I'm like the introverted extrovert. I like a lot, and then I like silence. So it's like I get all the people in the room, we get to hang out, we get to think as one, we get to have a goal in mind. That to me is the most important part. And then of course the end product, because like whatever you did doesn't matter if the end product is crap or if it was a struggle and the end product is good, then it was worth it, But yeah, for me, for my brain, it's the soup, getting everybody in the room together and doing all that pre-pro just to get to that point is already, you've done so much even just to enter set on the first day. And then you've got to do that whole big chunk. So it's the collaboration, I think. You can't do film so much solo, and music you can. And in film you can't so much. You have to find your people.
What are the best movies to watch to learn the craft of filmmaking?
I think any film is going to give you something. If you're watching it critically, you can see why does this sequence work or not work. Once you watch it once, and then you can go back and be like, okay, well, were the angles off? Were they really good? Did they do some cool oneer, like around a space? I think you can learn something from just about any film once you start breaking it down. And I find that part of my brain very hard to turn off. Like thinking about what lenses, what focal lengths they use, thinking about like, oh, this hasn't cut in a really long time, but it's been really interesting, and I haven't seen it cut. So yeah, I think just about anything. I mean, my favorites, I love 70s films. And I think like that, the camera's much more motivated because Steadicam was new and I don't think a lot of people were using it yet. And so it's like, if you were going to make that choice to move the camera on a dolly or Steadicam, like it was for a reason. And I like that. Like, I don't like a lot of unnecessary, like Michael Bay style. I just watched a Michael Bay movie. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even concentrate. Like, so, I think like for me, it's going back to the 70s cinema. I think it's just so beautiful. And like every picture's a painting, every frame's a painting. But I think you can learn anything from just about anything. Even watching the Michael Bay movie, I was like, oh my God, it's like drone shot. And I'm like, I learned I didn't like it really fast, but I'm like, is this what people want? I don't know. I need to know it, but do I need to like it? No.
Right, even from the first Jason Bourne movie, which I loved, but then you see the next one and you can see how fast things had changed, like how much we're used to just such rapid movement, rapid information, like everything's changed.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I watched Ambulance on the Plane recently, and it was just like constant cutting. And I was like, you don't need to go from a close up on a face to a drone shot back to a close up. Like, it's too much for my brain to process where we are, you know? And I think it loses the story a little bit when there's a lot of unnecessary camera movement. I think you lose track of where you are in a scene, you know, because like if you're just watching the camera do stuff, you know, I think it takes you out, or it makes the camera too present, because you want to forget that the camera's there, I think, depending on the style. But, you know, you want it to feel very natural that it's moving, or like if you're building tension and very slowly pushing in something like that, like that's working for the moment of the story. But once it's just like, we just need to be cutting constantly, we need to be like moving constantly, I think it just feeds into our collective ADD.
You said you loved Italian cinema, like the 70s Italian cinema. Who introduced you to that?
I think just you know, Michael and I just discovered it as we dug deeper. You know, we're always looking for something weirder to watch, and you know, I think it's become very popular over the last few years to know Dario Argento and to know Suspiria and stuff. But a couple years ago, like, we kind of went through all the Hammer horror. And we did our like little Hammer vampire movie, and then like as we dug deeper into those early 70s years, we're like, oh, this is what the Italians are doing. They're doing giallo. They're doing very colorful lighting, and like then you realize like, oh, there's hundreds of these. Even now, like when we watched the first 50, I was like, oh man, I've seen every giallo. Good job, me. And then it's like the next year, another small label comes out with another 20, and you're like, oh my god, these guys were prolific. You know, there's always more being discovered, and they're all really interesting because, to me, 50 years later, whatever it's been, it seems very dreamy. And it seems like they were doing very interesting things with the art of it. You know, like foreground, like putting mirrors, reflections. You know, they were experimenting with what the visual was doing. It's like, and they're very weird in that way. And I like that.
I'm wondering if we can talk about watching a movie as a kid and then as an adult. Mm-hmm. So the same movie, that is. You loved The Exorcist growing up. How is it to rewatch it now or in the past recently? And what do you see that's different?
Yeah. Well, I have a funny story with The Exorcist in that when I was in middle school, maybe like 12, I didn't have a lot of sleepovers at my place because I lived like kind of out of the town in a big scary old house, which adds to what happened, which is we rented The Exorcist, like, and I didn't know how scary it was, you know, and we watched it and I loved it. I thought it was so cool, but everybody called their mom and went home, like all 5 girls that were there. And it really traumatized them, but I was really into it. And I was very scared of it. You know, it was very, very scary. The possession, all that stuff really stuck with me for a long time. Definitely was too young to watch it, but you know, that was my memory for a long time, was just like the possession and the priest coming into the room. And then I did watch it again as an adult. And what struck me is it's a story about a mother trying to get help for her sick kid and going to all these doctors, doing all these experimentations. And then that's her final, like, Hail Marys, like, we'll get the priest in. But it was much different. It's a much more feminist story. It's a much different story than I even knew. And I think that gets lost a lot, even with other people watching it, is like, it's really about the mom to me. And I think that's like just a great movie for theme. Like, again, like, it's a lot to think about, because if you want to think about the Catholic stuff and the priests, you want to think about the devil, you want to think about demons, it's all there. But there's also all this stuff about health and the medical industry and doctors and Western medicine and what it means to be taking care of your kid while living your own life, because she's an actress in the movie. She's got her own life she's trying to have. And then she's got this problem child upstairs, you know? She's a single mom. So there's just so much there. It's so rich. And to me, it's beautiful shot and directed movie too, you know, in addition. That's why it's a classic. But there's so much to think about. And I think that's what it makes it a classic and makes it have staying power. Is there's a little bit for everybody, even if that stuff isn't resonating with you at the age or the time that you see it, maybe it will later.
And the music too was
Creepy.
So creepy and wonderful.
Yeah, and he just found that on like a record. I heard an interview with Friedkin where he was like, just like throwing on records and going to the record store, and it was a brand new record that came out, and he was like, this is it. It's creepy. And it's classic now. And horror for 30 years has tried to sound like that.
Did those girls talk to you at school afterwards, or?
I I think so.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
okay.
I think they
weren't
did.
so
Yeah.
traumatized. Oh, good. Okay.
It was funny because we had such a creepy house. Like, it was definitely like, because it was a little outside of town, people wouldn't even come for Halloween usually, but I think partly it was just because it's like this old, like 1700s farmhouse that people were not going to come up to the doors. It was already like the setting was too much for them in creepiness. And then the movie was like, we got to go.
Well, how was then later living in Massachusetts near, I don't know how close you were to Salem and all of the sort of, whether some of it was true or not true, whatever. How was that for you and your love of horror?
I always find like the Salem stuff like to be just like a kitschy vibe of New England. Like New England has so many little quirks, and I think because of Stephen King being from Maine, like it's seeped into the culture of horror a lot. Like how weird New England is, and like the witch trials, of course. Like there's like a lot of trauma, like to how we took it over and colonized and everything. So it's like one of the oldest areas of the U.S. because it's hard to have like supernatural horror or that kind of horror in a place we've lived in for like 100 years, like California. Like I feel like California has like less of that than creepy New England, where the houses are all 100 years older. So it definitely has its own vibe, but that stuff. It interests me and it's fun, but I took it for granted, I think, while I lived there.
Well, I mean, you could say the same about living in Hollywood. Like, you could live here 20 years and not go to Universal Studios and see some of the landmarks. So I guess that makes sense. But
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure in terms of maybe, because it seems like generations of families still live there that had experienced, their relatives experienced this. And if it seeped into the culture in any way. I realize there's the whole commercialization of it, but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a whole industry in Salem in October, to go to all the wax museums and learn about all that history and like, going to the houses and stuff as a kid. For sure. It's all there. Yeah.
what makes a horror film great?
It's like a horror film has to have the staying power. And I think to have the staying power to be great, I mean, it has to be beautiful. It has to have good tension. And that's all very hard to do, And it has to have a story that you care about and you think about later. Like I was saying before, like slashers don't really stick with me so much because it's like it doesn't feel like there's much under the surface there. But a movie like The Exorcist or The Shining, there's so much under the surface. And so much of like, what are our needs and desires as people? What was Jack's needs and desires in The Shining versus his family, versus those conflicts, versus the house, what the house wanted. There's just so much richness there. And so I think once you build the world, because in horror and sci-fi, you can build the world and build the experience and put everybody's desires in there. And if it's interesting, it'll stay and it'll be great.
You think with The Exorcist, that is what we didn't see, is what was implied? Because sometimes, like with some horror, we see everything and it's just like, okay, I've already seen that. It doesn't really scare me.
Yeah, I think we're so desensitized. Like especially like film has been around 100 years now. We've seen it all. But certainly great films like I love Hitchcock, and like you don't see a lot, but a lot of them are very creepy. Like Rebecca is a very creepy movie, and what is it but a housekeeper lurking in some windows, But it's the tension is so well done, and you don't need to see a ghost or something, You don't need to see the demon so much. Though The Exorcist, it does come through at the end a little bit more. You see the forget the name, the character of the demon, but there is a name for it.
Not Damien.
It'll come to me later.
Oh, yeah.
No, that's the Omen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm getting my horror mixed up. Okay.
But yeah, to me, it's the world building, because you can create it and it can be based on reality and it can be based on the Salem witch trials or whatever. But it's how you build the world and build the tension of it that makes it good.
And I think, like you were talking about earlier, just the slowness of 70s cinema.
Yeah.
I think that lends a lot to it because that adds to the tension.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we are losing patience with things. Like we want to see the monster in the first 20 minutes, or we get this information from distributors like, oh, we got to have a kill in the first scene or whatever. And like a lot of people have those like throwaway cold opens with a kill. And it's like, the 70s didn't need to do that. It just like open with a long car drive, like the Omen. I think if I'm remembering right, they do the long car drive like The Shining does. Like not 100% sure on that, but whatever it is, they let it breathe and they let you into the world that they're creating. They show up at a creepy house or whatever, and like nothing will happen for the first half of the movie or more, really, but it's building you up to that moment when something does finally click in, you know.
Right, with Exorcist, was it an archaeological dig?
Oh yeah, at the beginning, yeah,
right.
yeah,
Then
yeah.
they find something, and then they're, you know, it's like.
And it's funny because like you watch that and you almost forget it until later when it comes back around, you know, because then you're in her house and she's like glamorous and whatever, you know. But that is the cold open, is the archaeological dig, yeah.
What other tips do you have for writing horror?
I think for writing horror, you gotta just try to put your own stamp on it. Like anytime you're chasing what people want or what distributors want, or, you know, anything that's inauthentic to you, you're not going to make something great. Like it has to have you in it. It has to have something that you're excited about or interested in, or you're like, I really wanted to research this and put it in a movie. I think that's what's going to resonate with your audience more than like, oh, I need to do another Friday the 13th or something, you know, because that's what somebody wants. People don't know it, but I think they want something new. I think they want something fresh. You know, they'll fight against it. You know, they want the familiar, but they don't. You know, because it's not. You're not gonna like make any new inroads with the familiar. So I think don't be afraid to just go crazy with outside the box thinking or a story you've never seen before. Because to me, there's nothing more boring than seeing the same movie again and again and again. You know, it's got to have something of you in it. That's what makes it unique.
And so when you did 10, it has the creepy house, which sounds like you're drawn to that old sort of with the history. No, I mean there's something beautiful and scary about like old houses, and then it has sort of this Agatha Christie sort of mystery to it. So that was your stamp that you were putting on it.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of threw all the spaghetti on the wall for 10. You know, I didn't know if we were ever going to make another movie. So like, what are we interested in? But yeah, I love like these situations where, and it's very common, like 70s movies, but like probably because of Agatha Christie, it's like suddenly everybody has to come together because of an inheritance or because of a mysterious reason. And now we're all in a house together and everybody has their own goals for that weekend or whatever it is, you know? So it's always an interesting, because even like Knives Out did it recently, right? You know, it's once you get a bunch of people, adults in a house, and like, oh, what's actually going on here? Yeah, that was our own stamp on it. We wanted it to be all women. We wanted them all to have a second identity, and then it's like revealed later like why that is, and they're all hiding things from each other. So we tried to play with a lot of different things, and we just thought that was an interesting framework, I guess, you know, to do it. Wrap it in something familiar, but then like let it be our own little weird spy thing also on it. Yeah.
Do you have any rituals you do on Halloween?
It's funny. People always think I go hard on Halloween stuff, and I think people that make horror often do not, because horror is 365 days a year for me, you know. So we hardly ever dress up or do anything for Halloween. It's kind of sad, actually, but it is a big time for screenings, for going to the movies. It's always like a really fun month for me. I'm going to 80 billion festivals and seeing all the new horror. So it's a very fun season, but the actual like dress up or cosplay is this or that, like I don't ever have time for it anymore.
Well, plus two, being close to New England or on the East Coast, the falls are so beautiful. I've never actually seen them, but you know, see them on Instagram.
Yeah, there's nothing like walking through a graveyard when leaves are falling at dark. You know, it's very creepy in New England because the stuff is old. Yeah.
When you have films that have a dark sense of humor to them, are you worried about how many laughs you'll get? Do you, you know, you talked about you love it when at least there's one laugh in a festival screening or something. But dark humor is subjective, and is that something that you realize that not everyone's going to get it or even like it?
Yeah, for sure. It's a goal of mine to do a very serious horror film someday. I haven't done it yet. I feel like all of our films have like just a lot of humor in them. They're campy or they're fun in some ways. But I would love to do one that's like, I will really try to do the tension justice, you know, but that's the hardest thing in the world, you know, to do good tension. But yeah, we have like a wicked sense of humor. We're very sarcastic. And I think that comes through even when we didn't think initially that was what we were making. our previous film, Clickbait, like it was more of a straight ahead like social media horror, and then like we got in there and we're shooting it, and it just got funnier and funnier as it went along, and then maybe to its detriment a little bit, because people were like, why are they trying to be funny? This is like a slasher or whatever, you know. It's like that's a lot of like our letterbox reviews is like, they're not funny, they shouldn't try to be funny. But it, you know, at the end of the day, it is our sense of humor, and it just seeped its way in there even when we don't want it to, you know, or like even when it, not don't want it, but didn't intend it to. But I do think that is the one thing as filmmakers that like people know us for now. You know, they know it's gonna have this little unique sense of humor that's like seeping through everything. And I think that's just gonna be part of what makes the movie ours.
Right. And I think things age and have humor. Like if you go back to some like old TV show, like made for TV show from the 80s or something that, you know, I don't know if you can go on archive.org. They have all these old shows uploaded that I've never even heard of. And you watch them now and they're hilarious, but I don't think they were intended to be that. But you add big hair and just some crazy scenarios and then it becomes funny. So I think over time, age makes things funny.
Especially with gore and practical effects, like as they get better, the older like rubber suit monsters and things that actually might have scared an audience in the 50s isn't scary to us anymore, but it's nostalgic or it's campy and fun. So, you know, I think that through time, like now we really expect special effects to be like very hyper realistic. And so when you go back and you watch a blue zombie, it's not as scary to you as it might have been at the time, and it might be more funny. But sometimes I think the humor is there. Like I think a lot of Hammer horror is I think it's very funny, but I think the British are very funny. So I think that seeps in, like their culture of humor kind of seeps into the work a little bit more than maybe, I feel like the US, like our culture is a little bit more puritanical sometimes, which is funny for having tried to escape a monarchy. We should be more free, but I don't think we are.
Well, the British have a wonderful sense of timing, comedic timing.
Yeah.
You know, from Benny Hill to, you know, just there's just a difference to it seems like they're already up here 3 steps ahead sometimes.
Yes. Yes. Very dark, smart humor.